The word occult is everywhere right now, and almost always its meaning is distorted for clicks and controversy. Lately, it's become a synonym for shadowy, elite manipulation, or used as a way to frame the counterculture as dangerous. And yet, despite this, occult topics themselves are actually growing in popularity. We see it all the time now. Astrology, conspiracy theory, alternative spirituality of every kind. The algorithms we are so enmeshed in reward sensation over substance, especially when it comes to topics of the occult. Secret plots, trivialized versions of spiritual power, this is what gets views and grabs attention, which means anything more serious gets drowned out, and the misunderstanding only deepens. So, why does this even matter? Because something vital is being lost in the noise. With spirituality these days being dominated by virtue signaling and cultural identity, sincere engagement with living spiritual tradition is in decline. And there are serious consequences for the state of the world. Consequences that have, throughout history, motivated many to sincerely engage a tradition. Not just as a ritualistic exercise, but with practices that, over time, transform you, and, by extension, everything else. That transformation is precisely what the occult is really about. The word occult comes from the Latin occultus. It simply means hidden. Not evil, not demonic, hidden. But hidden in what sense? Not hidden like a coded message, waiting for the right decoder. Hidden in the way a capacity is hidden. Something that only becomes available once the conditions for it have developed. While the occult does have its ideas and symbolic systems designed to help tease out dimensions of reality that are generally inaccessible to ordinary experience, these are not what is most important. On their own, they can do very little. Simply learning about some esoteric secret is no key to hidden power, because it's spiritual practice that turns what is otherwise a mere eccentric curiosity into something effective or consequential. Such practice takes time, effort, and a particular kind of discipline that few people, no matter how curious or how great their means, ever undertake. Indeed, these traditions were never primarily about concealing anything. They were about revealing, just revealing through practice, not mere information or belief. Where secrecy did exist, and it existed almost everywhere, it was not essentially about guarding against enemies, but against misunderstanding. Certain things can only be transmitted through direct relationship and sustained development. Indeed, the knowledge tends to protect itself by being generally unavailable to anyone not yet ready for it. In the West, however, hostile religious institutions, and later rationalist ones, did force excessive secrecy, driving these traditions underground, which is largely why the word occult carries the suspicious connotations it does today. But that hostility is specifically Western. Other cultures had their own tensions. In China, for example, Taoist practitioners and Confucian orthodoxy existed in a kind of positive creative friction, a friction that benefited the greater society. The mystic, the internal practitioner, the dreamer, these figures had a recognized place. They were respected as reaching toward something that the mainstream culture hadn't caught up with. The mainstream of Western culture may idealize its dreamers in theory, but It is often quite hostile to fringe figures in reality. Its history of repression means that understanding the occult, without the connotations of something unnatural, requires some unlearning. The classical Chinese appreciation of their mystics and sages led to a tendency to treat the spiritual side of things simply as an aspect of any serious discipline. Calligraphy, painting, medicine, music, the martial arts. Each of these had an internal dimension, not simply a psychological or subjective one, but one concerned with the quality of consciousness from which the true character of any form emerges. Take calligraphy, for example. A master calligrapher was not simply someone who had perfected their technique. Many people could produce technically accomplished brushwork. What distinguished the master was something harder to name. A quality of presence moving through the stroke, animating the form in a way that mere technical precision never could. Two strokes might look nearly identical to an untrained eye, yet one would feel alive and the other mechanical. The difference was not in any teachable technique or form. It was in the state of being from which the form arose. This was not considered necessarily mysterious or supernatural. It was simply recognized as the highest dimension of the art. The whole discipline was ultimately in service of developing. This understanding was so central to Chinese culture that it eventually gave rise to its own category, the internal arts. Practices like Tai Chi and Qigong oriented explicitly around cultivating this internal quality. But the principle itself was understood to run through every serious art form. And it does. A musician can spend decades mastering an instrument, accumulating technique, developing fluency. But eventually, something shifts. Technique stops being what the practice is about. The music begins to depend on something more fundamental, the quality of attention brought to the moment, the intensity of presence available. An intensity that determines whether a song transforms or merely performs. Every serious discipline reaches this threshold, the point where development is no longer about acquiring more skill, but about what kind of consciousness is doing the practice. This is the core of what the occult traditions were always concerned with. The recognition that reality has dimensions that only become available as the practitioner develops, and that these dimensions are not incidental to the highest human attainments. They are those attainments. So, what is actually happening at that threshold? What is it that the calligrapher has cultivated that the technician hasn't? People often assume the occult is pointing toward some separate, hidden realm, a ghostly layer floating behind or above the physical world, a secret place you gain access to with the right knowledge or ritual. But this makes it sound unnatural. The occult deals with the metaphysical, but this isn't a mysterious order of being added on top of ordinary reality. It's the relational structure running through everything. The physical, energetic, and cognitive connections that ordinary experience skims over without ever fully diving into. What limits access to that depth is not a specific formula. It's the degree of relational harmony one brings to an encounter. The more coherently connected the whole person, in body, in attention, in understanding, the more they become something capable of meeting reality. And this is what that threshold in every serious discipline actually is, the attainment of a capacity to enter into things more consciously, more fully, more coherently. There's no essential secret. There's only the extent of one's development and what that development makes possible. Now, here is where this becomes something larger than the individual. Because if the compatibility of our connections determine what dimensions of reality we can access, then it also determines what forces can operate through us. Human beings are constantly influenced by forces they don't fully perceive. Cultural patterns, emotional atmospheres, symbolic systems, narratives that shape entire civilizations. And the occult traditions go further, pointing to subtle, powerful, and indeed sometimes frightening forms of agency that have a hand in shaping our world. Yet, it should be understood that this agency doesn't simply override the structures it enters. It has to work through them, through what people are prepared to perceive, through the habits of attention already present, through the degree of coherence or incoherence that characterizes a culture's collective life. Influence is everywhere, but it only becomes effective through the structures that receive it, which means the deepest forces shaping a civilization are never simply imposed from the outside by hidden actors. They arise from a vast field of interacting players, human and otherwise, all operating within the possibilities that consciousness itself opens or closes. And that changes the question entirely. The question is no longer who is secretly controlling everything. It becomes what kinds of awareness, what degrees of coherence allow certain influences to take hold in the first place. Because if influence works through structures already present in us, then those structures are not merely something done to us. They are something we participate in shaping. So, what is the occult really? Not secret elites, not supernatural interference, not an aesthetic. It's about coherence, the degree to which a person, a practice, a culture has evolved the capacity to meet reality, to enter into ever deeper relation with the infinity that is there beneath the surface of ordinary experience. A civilization that treats this tradition as essentially irrational or dangerous does not neutralize these forces. It simply ensures they operate without anyone conscious at the wheel. And the hysteria we're seeing right now is a symptom of exactly that. A growing sense that we are at the mercy of forces beyond our control or understanding. But this has always been the nature of reality. There will always be dimensions of existence beyond control or understanding. That doesn't make us passive victims, because no other being or group is in control either. What the occult traditions were cultivating was something more interesting than control, an increasingly self-organized pattern of relations in individuals and in cultures that can meet the infinite depth of things more consciously, draw more out of every encounter, and feed something more differentiated and alive back into the world. Increasing coherence doesn't just help one navigate reality more fully. It intensifies creativity, individuation. It generates what wasn't possible before. That is what every serious tradition was working toward, under many names, in many forms. The occult is simply the name the West could never quite find a respectable home for. That is what this channel is here to change.